to defeat your enemy.
You must know them. Not simply their battle tactics, but their history, philosophy, art. Everything leading up to this moment has been rehearsal. The real performance is about to begin.
Where is Grand Admiral Thrawn?
Lucasfilm is beginning to sow the seeds for their very own response to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, using Disney Plus as their platform, creating a multitude of stories, each self-contained on its own, but all connected by the greater universe and an even greater threat. Today, I want to talk about this universe and why I believe that Chapter 13 of The Mandalorian not only teased our second entry into this Star Wars interconnected universe by a Ahsoka Tano live-action series, but also, I believe that Ahsoka Tano has given us our first glimpse at the villain behind everything. A decade-long villain and the great antagonist and central threat of this connected Star Wars universe. In this week's episode of The Mandalorian, with the drop of a mere 3 words, they have guaranteed a directional shift in the entire Star Wars lineup going forward. And today we are talking about Grand Admiral Thrawn and what it means for him to be back in the post-Imperial era. Starting with his real-world history, the year was 1991, and it had been 8 years since there had been any form of Star Wars hype in the masses. The world was starting to forget about Star Wars, and Lucas had pretty much decided that he was done with the series and wasn't going to go back and do 1, 2, and 3 like he had originally planned. In comes the author Timothy Zahn, who wrote a trilogy of books known as the Thrawn Trilogy, beginning with Heir to the Empire. The Thrawn Trilogy drew much of its lore from a Star Wars tabletop game that was mildly popular at the time, and brought all of those little lore tidbits to life with the characters that we know and love from the original trilogy. However, instead of just pitting them against Palpatine like authors who came after Heir to the Empire would do,
somehow Palpatine returned.
Again, he decided to create a brand new villain. And instead of creating a new Sith, this character wasn't a Sith or even a Force user at all. He was simply a military mastermind unlike any the galaxy had ever seen before or since.
I study the art of war, work to perfect it. But you were forged by it.
His name was Grand Admiral Thrawn, one of the 13 Grand Admirals personally promoted by Palpatine himself, and the only non-human to be given that honor. The last piece of material in Star Wars Legends to feature Grand Admiral Thrawn was the book, also by Timothy Zahn, Outbound Flight, which released in 2006, and we wouldn't hear anything else about Thrawn for another 10 years. Yes, 10 years later, in 2016, we got the much anticipated reveal that Grand Admiral Thrawn would be making his return to Star Wars canon, despite the fact that Rebels was considered to be less hardcore than its older brother, the Clone Wars.
She serves a purpose.
They still did take great care to make Grand Admiral Thrawn as true to the source material as possible, even if he did have to be nerfed quite a significant amount in order to make him actually defeatable by the Ghost Crew. Now, if you were one of the many fans of Grand Admiral Thrawn who were disappointed by his nerfed portrayal in Star Wars Rebels and the new Thrawn trilogy, or if you watched Star Wars Rebels and thought Thrawn was great and didn't understand why other people were disappointed that he wasn't like he was in Legends because you are introduced to Thrawn in Star Wars canon, this video is going to be great for both of those groups, or even if you really don't know much about Thrawn at all, because we are going to be talking about everything about Grand Admiral Thrawn in Legends and what that means for his future in Star Wars canon, and why I am convinced that our next appearance of Thrawn will be even greater than his original debut in Heir to the Empire.
No, that's not possible.
Over and over again in the Thrawn trilogy, it is emphasized how superior Thrawn is, that even though the New Republic outnumbers the Imperial Remnant several times over, Thrawn is still able to outthink, outmatch, and outplay the New Republic. Despite starting with a mere fraction of the Star Destroyers necessary to call himself a fleet, and only a handful of stormtroopers to command, the books demonstrate how Grand Admiral Thrawn lays the pieces out in order to manipulate the events so that our heroes will react predictably. One of the ways he does this is by calculating how Luke's instincts work. And since Luke will always react in accordance to his instincts, by learning the ways of the Force, even if he can't command them, and by learning the natural instincts of a Jedi, Thrawn is able to predict Luke's actions and where he will go and what he will do. But of all his skills, Thrawn is most famous and remembered for one thing above all else: his love and analysis of art.
Art.
Grand Admiral Thrawn is a master at understanding and analyzing, breaking down art. Through art, he can understand the mind of a species, and through understanding their mind, can predict their battle tactics and their movements. Thrawn amassed a massive digital collection of art, which he displayed through holoprojector in his office, and would always pull up the files on any given species that he was about to do battle with, understanding the lines and movements and colors, the interwovenness of their pieces, in order to understand how their minds connected thoughts, threats, and fears.
What can you tell me about this?
In Legends, he only had one single piece of genuine art. Art remembering the only species where studying their art provided no tactical advantage. On top of that, of course, Thrawn knows that he would be vulnerable to an attack through the power of the Force, and so he discovers in the galaxy a rare creature known as an Isalamiri, an odd, furry, salamander-looking creature actually able to push out a bubble that repels the power of the Force. When within this bubble, the Force merely stops short, as the book describes as a bubble pushing against water. And you can tell these books were written in the 90s because Thrawn goes 100% full Bond villain and just has these things on his lap, petting them through most of the chapters. It's a little dated, but it's still super awesome.
I'm glad you could all come to my little party. And Flopsy's glad too. Aren't you, Flopsy?
And it is one of the parts of Thrawn that fans were really missing in his canon interpretation. The Isilamiri only appear in Star Wars Rebels as an Easter egg but in Thrawn's office behind him in statue form. And this was a demonstration of kind of what was wrong with Thrawn in Star Wars Rebels, that both times he's defeated because he doesn't understand the Force, which was very different from Thrawn in Star Wars Legends, where he understood the Force better than Luke most of the time. Even though he couldn't use it, he had to learn everything about his opponent. And if his opponent's a Jedi, he had to learn everything about the Force and the Jedi and their art. And of course, Thrawn in Legends did that, and we know Thrawn in canon still says that he does that, and yet he never learned enough about the Force to not be surprised by it when it would happen.
What Jedi devilry is this?
Switching over to Star Wars canon for a little bit, Thrawn was introduced, as we said, in 2016 in Season 3 of Star Wars Rebels. After Thrawn had officially been brought back through Star Wars Rebels, Timothy Zahn was brought back onto the team in order to write 2 new Thrawn trilogies. One that takes place before the events of Star Wars Rebels, or particularly before the season finale of Star Wars Rebels Season 4, and another series that takes place during Thrawn's time on Sheila, the Chiss homeworld in the Unknown Regions. In chronological order, the first book is also the most recent to come out, Thrawn Ascendancy Chaos Rising, which released just earlier this year. And it tells of Thrawn's early military career within the Chiss Ascendancy in the unknown regions. The book also overlaps with the Clone Wars era portion of Thrawn Alliances, which I thought was pretty cool. Much like in Legends, Thrawn left the Chiss Ascendancy in order to go to the Empire, hoping to find a military powerful enough to stand against the threat that he knew was lurking in the unknown regions. Of course, in Legends, we know that this was the Yuuzhan Vong, whereas in canon, it is a currently undefined race known as the Grisk Hegemony, a race that looks like it's going to be playing a similar role that the Yuuzhan Vong did in Legends. This is nothing new for Disney, as we've seen them time and time again borrow some of the stories from Legends, reinterpreting them with a higher budget on the big screen. For instance, we know that Rogue One is a retelling of the Dark Forces video game, only with Jyn Erso instead of Jan Ors. Similarly, The Rise of Skywalker is basically the exact same plot as the Dark Empire comic series, which, by the way, no one liked Dark Empire when it was new. Like, when Disney took over and said, oh, all the old stuff is not going to be canon anymore, I'm not kidding, my first thought was, well, at least Dark Empire isn't canon anymore, and then they just do it anyway. Okay, look, that was dumb, and I think Disney's learning from that, and they're trying to pull from better stuff here, but my point is, of the post-Endor era, no one thought Dark Empire was the best. Most people agreed Thrawn is the best post-Endor storyline, and there were some people who were like Yuuzhan Vong, and there's a very good case to be made for that, but people who say Dark Empire was the best post-Endor story, yeah, they were wrong. And I think Disney's catching on to that. We can see from The Mandalorian that they are pulling from really good stuff, and they're putting better people in charge. And that's the thing, is that, yes, it is mostly to do with the fact that Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau are in charge of The Mandalorian, but the fact of the matter is that Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau are the only ones putting out ongoing content right now, and that demonstrates, at least to me, that the higher-ups are starting to get an idea for who they should be putting in charge of Star Wars projects. Especially with the reveal of Ahsoka, I have a very, very strong feeling that Ahsoka is not coming back in The Mandalorian. I think her role is done, I think she is going to move on, but I think that she is moving on not out of live action, but I think that she is going to get her own live action series, whereas Moff Gideon will remain the large Imperial villain of The Mandalorian, and Grand Admiral Thrawn will become the villain of the new Ahsoka series. I believe that the new Ahsoka live action series will be a live action TV retelling of the Heir to the Empire. We already know that Disney wants to use what they did with the MCU of this multi-character interconnected universe in Star Wars, however, have the platform for that be the series rather than the movies. And we know that The Mandalorian is supposed to be the launching pad for this new interconnected Star Wars multi-character storytelling platform. And so I believe that Season 2 is starting to touch down on each of these characters, and they're starting to cross paths without actually teaming up. In Chapter 9, we got Cobb Vanth and Boba Fett. In Chapter 11, we got Bo-Katan Kryze. And in Chapter 13, we got Ahsoka Tano. And I believe that many of these characters are going to be getting their own live-action series in the years going forward. And my ultimate belief is that much like each Marvel movie had its own villain, but the great villain was Thanos, lurking behind the shadows for over a decade, the great villain of the interconnected Star Wars universe will be the mastermind, the only person who truly deserves that credit, none other than Grand Admiral Thrawn. I believe that just as he did in Legends, he will create his own offshoot of the Empire. Unaware of the fact that Palpatine had truly survived, he believes that the Empire must survive. And so he takes charge of the Imperial remnant, while the First Order has already gone away into the unknown regions and is preparing for Palpatine's return. And I even believe that the threat of Thrawn is going to be more impactful to the galaxy and a bigger deal than the return of Palpatine could ever hope to be. Now, if you are worried that this new live-action interpretation of Thrawn will be lessened from Heir to the Empire because of the weaknesses and nerfs given to Thrawn in the new Thrawn books as well as Star Wars Rebels, I actually shared in that camp for a long time. I was really worried that Thrawn would come back, but he wouldn't be the same Thrawn I remembered from the original Thrawn trilogy. So I actually went back and reread Heir to the Empire in celebration of Thrawn getting name-dropped in The Mandalorian, and what I found was something very interesting. You see, it never is implied or said that Thrawn didn't grow between the death of the Emperor and his time as the highest-ranking officer in the Imperial Navy. And we have to remember that in canon, Thrawn hasn't been seen since the same year as the Battle of Yavin, almost 10 years before The Mandalorian Season 2, which is plenty of time for him to grow and establish himself as a villain. One other thing I was worried about was that he would become a good guy or a protagonist and team up with Ezra Bridger, since it is much more difficult to write a compelling, overpowered, greatest at all things of all time protagonist than it is to write a greatest of all time, greatest at all things antagonist. And the fact that Thrawn is guaranteed to be an antagonist given the events of Chapter 13 of The Mandalorian, the fact that he is in charge of this clearly evil magistrate, shows us that Thrawn is certainly a villain, and I believe that he is now more intelligent, more learned, and more powerful than he ever was in Star Wars Rebels or even the new Thrawn books, because he has a tactic that has been shown over and over in the new Thrawn books. Thrawn never makes the same mistake twice. And now Thrawn has encountered the Jedi and been defeated by the Force, and now Ahsoka is hunting him. I believe that it's incredibly possible that this will bring about the return of the Ysalamiri. And maybe, just maybe, Ezra might actually be the one on Thrawn's side, playing the role of Joruus C'baoth in this new retelling of Heir to the Empire.
Everything leading up to this moment has been rehearsal. The real performance is about to begin.
Just as he did in Heir to the Empire, Thrawn will begin building a new fleet of warships. We also know that he has brought the HK assassin droids back into production, as seen by the 7th Fleet logo on the HK-87 droids present in Chapter 13. Thrawn is building a new empire, and it's an empire like we haven't seen since 1991. To summarize, I believe that the interconnected Disney Plus Star Wars universe will loosely follow the Heir to the Empire storyline, although with Thrawn being a much bigger villain than he was in a simple trilogy of books, being a decade-long threat behind the shadows and manipulating every villain that we encounter in each offshoot series. And I also believe that this will eventually pave the way for the Grisk War, which will be a retelling of the Yuuzhan Vong War. And I will have a video coming out about how this will make the sequel trilogy irrelevant. So please stay tuned for that. Whether you are excited about that or nervous about that, I guarantee you it's good news for everybody. So please subscribe and like if you found the video informative. And thank you all so much for watching. And as always, may the lore be with you, now and forever.
Where is Grand Admiral Thrawn?